Hello, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to this session. I know that we have people joining from all over the world, so a very, very big welcome. Wherever you are, we hope that you're going to enjoy this session on the Pathway to 17 Summit. It's titled Levers, Triggers, and Tipping Points for Gender Equity. Just to start off, I will introduce myself. My name is Gabriela Pinheiro. I am a critical social and psychological researcher working at the Center for Sexualities, AIDS and Gender at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And just to give you some context, I will be moderating today's session, and I'm joined by three wonderful panelists who I'm going to introduce shortly. And the wider context, I suppose, or the springboard for this conversation today around these three ideas relates to a suite of courses that the CSANG designed and has been implementing with the Digital Frontiers Institute around gender equality and specifically change making towards gender equality in the digital finance sector more specifically. So we're going to chat to these three, or speak to these three ideas and chat with one another. And we invite you throughout the session, of course, to weigh in on what is being said, to share with us some of your own insights, experiences, stories around these different topics. And you can do that by posting in the various chat spaces that are provided on this platform. So without further ado then, I'm going to introduce to you my three panelists that I will be moderating today. The first is Pamela Nyamutoka Katooro. And Pamela, it's so wonderful to have you with us. Pamela has 16 years worth of experience in international development and is currently Africa Regional Director at the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, which is responsible for delivering the strategic direction of 5 country programs in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. Pamela is also the Vice Chairperson and Director of Gender at the Digital Frontiers Association of Uganda and the leading gender strategy, design, and implementation expert. She's also the Gender COP facilitator for Uganda and Rwanda for the DFI Gender Equality Changemakers Program. Pamela was the first female Ugandan certified digital finance practitioner and is extremely passionate about gender equity, and as a result has initiated and implemented several regional and country-based gender inclusive financial inclusion programs for several thousand women-led SMEs through both public and private partnerships. She has a consistent and institutional track record for advocacy of gender responsive policies at organizational levels, as well as in strategic areas for gender equity. And I think most importantly and most excitingly, she is the winner of the Gender Equality Changemakers Award. She is a Rotarian and also enjoys volunteering as a mentor for young female lawyers under the global Girls for Girls G4G network. So Pamela, a very, very warm welcome to you, and I'm going to hand over to you in a moment to answer or to speak rather to some questions that I know you've prepared. But next up, I'd like to introduce Betty Wilkinson. Betty, a very, very warm welcome to you. Betty is a multiple award-winning leader in financial markets and policy, inclusion and sustainable development. She has worked for over 30 years building, managing and graduating high-performance multinational teams to produce innovative, sustainable results in collaborative ways. Her programs have established and run funding in the US billions, which have benefited millions of poor households in developing countries across 4 continents, largely in long-term engagements. Her professional experience worldwide includes in the Asian Development Bank as Director, Public Management, Finance and Trade in Central and West Asia, Associate Director at the IRIS Center at the University of Maryland, leading multiple country programs and groundbreaking research, and First Assistant Secretary of Finance and Planning in the government of Papua New Guinea. Currently, Betty is working as the Deputy Chair of the WWF Zambia Advisory Board, Senior Advisor to Financial Sector Deepening Zambia, and Transition Assistance Practice Group Member for the Institute for Integrated Transitions in Barcelona. Her graduate studies in agricultural finance at Cornell University followed a BA honors in business economics at the University of California. Betty, a very, very warm welcome to you. And thank you so much for offering up your time today to share your wealth of experience with us. And finally, our final panelist, Malisa Mukanga, who is currently the country manager of Hans R. Newman Stiftings Africa, a not-for-profit organization with an objective to promote sustainable development. She leads the country operations team, implementing hands-on projects to provide the working and to improve, rather, the working and living conditions of small-scale coffee farming families in Uganda. With a dedicated team of technical and administrative staff, her role is to provide direction, manage processes, and facilitate the use of transformational approaches to address challenges and harness opportunities. Malisa's passion for equipping and empowering young people to make informed decisions and live self-determined lives, benefiting their families, communities, and the world, has resulted in diverse career opportunities, from teaching psychology to high school students, participating in a mentor program for marginalized youth in urban centers, and to now coordinating interventions skilling youth in rural areas. As a trained psychologist with financial management qualifications and over 10 years of working experience in the development sector, Malisa has been privileged to lead, train, and coach, as well as provide counsel and conceptual support to individuals and organizations. And Malisa, this is how I know you. You were recently recognized as well as a finalist in the Gender Equality Changemakers Program for your excellent work in establishing interventions towards gender equality and equity in the coffee sector in Uganda. So with that, those were very long bios. With that, just to welcome you all again and to thank you for offering up your time. We have a lot to work through in the session, so I think we should jump straight in. And I'm going to ask Betty first to speak to us a little bit about the Zambian context and how gender dynamics, in organizations don't establish themselves or are not established and sustained in a vacuum. So Betty, what are some of the things that you've observed in Zambia and perhaps in other places that feed into organizational contexts and that, create particular gender dynamics? Over to you. Betty, sorry, you are muted, so you're first going to have to there we go. Cool.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. I'm going to give you the 1 minute snapshot of Zambia. It's 19.5 million people, of which the population is the average age is 17.6 years. So we're really young here. There's over 52% women. It's a bit larger than Texas. So it's in the top 20% in terms of country size. The country is essentially land linked with 8 countries around it. It's about 1,100 meters above sea level. So we're in the high plateau. We have 3 big rivers, the Zambezi, Luangwa, and the Kafue rivers. Copper is the big king here, but agriculture is also crucial. The economy has had some significant challenges recently. We're digging our way out with a new government and an IMF program and other kinds of economic approaches. In terms of the economy, it's not diversified enough. It's highly informal. Highly informal means women are doing a lot of work outside the formal sector. And socially, this is a country that is a slow adapter in terms of social change because of lack of trust. However, it's also highly innovative. The very first mobile money activities that were attempted in Africa were in Zambia, and they failed because people didn't trust it. So now we're a little behind on that, but there are other kinds of things that are happening here that are very exciting. Now, so women have low political power here. There's problems with social norms and the reinforcement of women as leaders in terms of household, food, emergency roles. The expectation is if there's an emergency, the women will somehow find money and resources to fix it. So that's really the perception, rural and urban. And women are responsible for money in terms of these things. So it's really a challenge for them. Okay, how are we going to make sure there's some savings, there's some money on the side? So here are the first things that I've found in terms of what's necessary for gender levers, gender triggers, gender opportunities. The first is you have to do the research on what the situation with women, and you have to share it very widely. Because as soon as people realize that oh, women can actually make companies more profitable. The banks started putting CEOs who are women. And the regulators started stepping up and doing a lot more with women and moving them up more rapidly. So that's part of this situation. The social norms of finance, savings groups, the role of traditional leaders, and particularly traditional leaders who are women. What is their circumstances? And then also in industries, what's happening with women in industries? As soon as there's evidence that women are very low on these numbers, and that they can contribute significantly, suddenly you start seeing women moving up faster and being hired more regularly. The second thing for women is that you have to find men as well as women who can be advocates for gender, and you have to actively support them. That means the chiefs, it means husbands, it means educators, and it means researchers. If they don't actively support the work that they're doing, you won't be able to either in terms of the triggers and things of that nature. The third thing I might suggest on this is that you hire and retain female leaders, not just women at the bottom. I'm harassing all the time the banks and also the accounting companies in Zambia, because every time we have meetings, I said, this is a manual, where's the women? Oh, well, we're working on it. Okay, well, this is year 6 and you're still working on it, and I see one who's organizing things, that's it. So you have to make sure that you're always putting this in the front and saying, this is really important. You should be hiring, you should be making these people more visible. And then finally, you need to use your contacts to speak out. So I'm always talking about gender. One of the very first things I say in big meetings like this, where all these men are there, I go, so where's the women? I actually even say this on emails where you see photographs of meetings. And I said, where's the women? Where are they? I even said that to the president about a meeting he had where he had no women in the room. I said, so where are the women? We know that they're in your house, that you have a vice president who's female. How are you activating all this? And it's pretty crucial that you do these insights. These are particularly true to Zambia, but they're also true generically, right? So the people are young, that makes it harder for women to move up because they don't have that experience, right? But because the economy is undiversified and you have minors, okay, well, where are women minors? Okay, well, maybe you don't have them. But the point is, the research has to be there, that you have to do men who are advocates. You have to really find men who are advocates. And it's not always easy when this society has 15.4% who are in the parliament who are female. So, this country is moving a lot slower with regard to gender. In the organizations where I have worked here, I've been fortunate to be the woman CEO, and then to make sure we had a program where we're looking at a 50-50 all the way down. And because that was the rule and everyone understood why it was the case, that's what was happening. And then we started influencing the market because we had women leaders who were talking to these issues and saying, these are important. This is what you need to understand. And in-house, we also had to address these questions. So that's what I think can be useful to this team and the viewers today. I've run it at 6.5 minutes, so you get a little extra time. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to questions.
Betty, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and insights, and I think in a very concise way to deliver quite a lot of detail that packs a punch around these different ideas, triggers, levers, tipping points. And I really like the fact that you provide a very situated account of what change and progress look like in relation to a specific context, because as we know, these things don't develop in a vacuum. And very often what we see is that the gender dynamics that are at play more broadly trickle down, but can also be challenged in different organizational settings. So I want to just remark also at the fact that I think what you say around the need for organizations to be very transparent and generous with the sharing of any results that come from gender auditing processes, for example, that is so important. In one of the other sessions that I sat in on today, they were having, this conversation around the need for greater transparency and the fact that we know that organizations are not perfect, that change takes a very long time to see, but even, to share a report transparently and to speak to even incremental or what may seem like small changes is very, very important. So I thank you so much for that. So that I don't hog the mic, I'm going to address a question to you, Malisa, now, in relation to the question of tipping points. And I think this is such an interesting idea. I came across a study that was published in 2018 in the journal Science. And the study reported that 25% of a workplace needs to take a stand against gendered harms. And they were talking about sexual harassment more specifically, before the behavior is no longer accepted as normal. And so change can be catalyzed. And the study defined the term tipping point as a point in time when a group or many group members rapidly and dramatically change their behavior by widely adopting a previously rare practice. So, Malisa, you know, to you then, have you witnessed tipping points towards gender transformation in your own experience as a professional in your organization? And what have these moments looked like for you? What have you experienced? Thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Gabby. It's great to be here. Hello to the audience. I can just, let me say first, it's a wonderful bridge to what Betty has said, that it's so important to make a business case for gender transformation and how it will benefit the business, the community, the world at large. Talking about tipping points, when I think about my journey, and it has been a long one, it's long moments that different small changes have taken place, and then you see the change over time, not within, you know, it's not a swift movement. That's what I find. If I think about language, that when we started out in Uganda, we've been here since 2004, we came in to look at livelihood improvement and said, you know, increased production in the coffee sector. And we were teaching the farmers good agricultural practices and entrepreneurship. And yes, there was an increase in production and increase in revenue, but that did not equate quality of life. So it needs to look at what's happening here. What is the issue? What's our looking at household dynamics? And we saw the gender disparities. And, you know, brought in, looked at, said, okay, what is it that we need to do? We need to promote gender equality. And that was really, you know, bringing in an expert and also looking at how do we do our work, putting on a gender lens and saying, what is not going right? We're providing the trainings, but who's coming to the trainings? It was men, it wasn't women. So changing the way we work. And that also creating an awareness for our colleagues, for all of us to say, we need to start seeing the different genders. With the language, you know, you talk about chairman. You when you think about a farmer, you're thinking about a man, and looking around saying this could be a young woman. When you think about an agronomist staff, you're thinking about males. And even when we're doing our recruitment, to say actively now hiring women. And again, going back to what Betty was saying about hiring women leaders. So that you don't only have the quotas, but you have women who are there to address the topics, but also make the decisions. So we're not just checking the boxes. So I can't talk about a tipping point as in a swift move, but we are seeing gradual change. It's still a process. When we talk about sexual harassment, that on one hand, you see certain behavior is no longer acceptable. And that also has to do with the legal framework that the government of Uganda brought in a policy, and that each organization needs to have a policy protecting against sexual harassment. And having organizations adopt it. So colleagues are more careful. It creates another problem that then it becomes, it's unseen. So one needs to empower women and vulnerable colleagues to speak up about it if it's happening, but it is no longer business as usual.
Awesome, Malisa, thank you so, so much. I think that what you highlight around the importance of making a business case for gender equity and equality is pertinent. And what stood out for me, just through my work on the Gender Equality Changemakers program, is that when you start to point out the business case, suddenly, people are a lot more motivated to make those links between gender parity and a healthy organization, healthy financially, but also healthy in terms of its people, and the ways in which its people are relating to one another. And I think that what you are speaking about in relation to the Ugandan context specifically is just how those everyday taken for granted norms around picturing in your mind a farmer, things that we do largely take for granted and inform much of our attitudes to developing policies around particular kinds of work, agriculture, for example, as you mentioned. So one informs the other. I'm very interested to know why was it that it was mostly men who were attending the kind of initial set of workshops that you did around gender equality?
Well, the workshops weren't specific to gender equality.
Okay.
But it's coffee. Coffee is a cash crop in Uganda.
Okay.
And it's deemed as a man's crop. So the coffee belongs to the men, even though women do most of the work. So according to FAO, it's about 75% of the farm labor is done by women and children.
Right.
But when it comes to marketing the produce, it's the men. But also having that mindset change from it's the man's crop, it's his property, to saying it's a family business. And everyone in the family can profit from it. So that was very, very important. And then also, I mean, to touch on what Betty was saying, identifying colleagues within our organization who become gender champions. And it can't just be women. We went from having gender being a special topic to being a cross-cutting component that is looked at in every area of our organization. So when it comes to human resource, we're looking at saying, in our recruitments, you are encouraging women to apply. When we are interviewing, we're looking at not only do they have the qualifications, if they don't have the experience, is there something we can do to bridge the gap? When we're looking at the technical areas, saying, you know what, we want to see more women trained and also growing into leadership positions, grooming them, and then hearing them. So not just having them at the table, but encouraging them to speak up, because the perspective of the different genders is very important. And also the challenges that they face in the field, working in the field. Yes.
Yeah, I hear you. So you're speaking to the fact that the way in which the sector has kind of been shaped by these social norms means that the role of women's roles are largely, or have been largely, invisible. And so there's a particular kind of work then that involves showing that, exposing that, which can be extremely challenging, I suppose. But as you describe it, and I know we've spoken about this at length in the Gender Equality Changemakers program, a very rewarding one too. Thank you so much, Betty and Malisa. Pamela, I'm going to invite you to speak to the insights that Betty and Malisa have made, but also then to speak more specifically to this idea of resistance to tipping points. Malisa, for example, has spoken about the invisibility, the constructed invisibility of women's work in a particular sector, which could be regarded as a kind of a point of resistance, or a sticky point that needs to be addressed before further change can be witnessed. Can you speak specifically to the idea of resistances, and maybe to tools, I suppose, that you yourself have used or colleagues have used to recognize, understand, and maybe mitigate these resistances. I invite you to speak to Betty and Malisa's contributions, and then also to share from your own perspective as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabby, Betty, and Malisa. Thank you very much. I think just speaking about, what Malisa just talked about, this invisible hand. For example, she talked about this in the agriculture sector. You use the statistics will actually tell you that yes, there are more women involved, and if you look at it at surface level, you think indeed they are, participating. But if you go deeper and see how much income are they actually earning compared to their counterparts, that's when you realize that it's important to, get into the deeper dynamics of this. If you even just look at, in Uganda, we talk about, financial inclusion or digital financial inclusion. We have even, I think now the statistics even show many women having or owning mobile phones. But if you look into, for example, the utilization, what are they using them for? Are they able to access credit from this? Do they understand how to get mobile financial services? When you go into those dynamics, you actually realize that the benefits arising from that actually not as much. So yeah, so speaking about, that context, it's important to look into that. And what you talked about, the resistance, again, it's very subtle. And resistance can be, open resistance to, policies that, promote gender equity. It can be, but it can also be inaction. If I fail to act or do nothing about the status quo, that's a form of resistance, actually. Or denying that there is a problem and not recognizing that that there is a challenge and something needs to be done about it. So there are various ways in which, this resistance manifests itself, both in the open context, in the ecosystem, but even at the organizational level. And I was speaking to at organizational level. First of all, I think the first important thing is to recognize that there is the resistance, to understand that your agenda is actually, you're not on the same agenda. And how do you do that? One of the tools is to what they call a pulse check. And this is, first of all, getting to get the feelers. When you talk about deep structure actually speaks to, our own biases, our own feelings, and these are habits that we've acquired over a very long period of time, and we don't recognize, it's subconscious. So if you do a quick, it's a pulse checks, amongst the staff or employees, and just understand where are we on this gender transformation journey, you realize that there are quite a number of deep-seated biases that will come in the way of your transformation journey. So first of all, picking those up, and then understanding what they are. And then, of course, now delving deeper into doing a gender audit. That's a very powerful tool, because the gender, audit actually helps to identify all these, entrenched practices, even at organizational level, the culture of the organization, not only at an individual level, but at an organizational level. What is the culture? Because that culture can be a source of resistance advertently or inadvertently. So undertaking that gender audit is really key to ensure that, you pick out all those cultural work culture biases, even the policies. How are the policies? Policies can actually be a standing block. Not all policies are geared towards gender transformation. Some policies actually inadvertently create the opposite in terms of the workplace environments. Maybe even the HR policies, if they're gender blind, that means somebody can always hide behind the HR policy and say the policy doesn't allow us to do this, and that is already resistance, or we have a policy on this and that. So even just delving into the organizational policies through, that gender audit, and then also looking at the environment in the organization. Does it promote, gender equality? So just going through doing that gender audit and seeing where you are. And then once you've done that, it's also then important to get it's very important to also look into how you can get the buy-in, participation of the leadership, participation of key champions, even the people who they say the ones who make the most noise, or who are the backlash, they'll always be there. Getting their buy-in is very key. Instead of pushing them out and saying this kind of people, they are resistant, they don't understand. It's important to bring them closer, and then of course, and then working towards policy changes, because some of the transformational ideas or actions that we have will never happen as long as that policy is still as it is. If it's gender blind, it's gender blind. It's gender unresponsive, that's what it is. So working towards making the policies more gender responsive, more making the workplace more gender neutral, and basically examining the whole landscape, right from the policy to the people, to the culture, and the general ecosystem around the workplace. And then a very key thing is knowledge, providing knowledge, learning is very, very key, because sometimes people resist because they actually don't know. When they get enlightened about the importance of, this gender transformational agenda, then they will buy in. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of providing knowledge, continuous learning. I will tell you, even for me, like the gender change maker course was very eye-opening. And yet I think that I've been around for a while. I feel I'm a gender advocate, but just going through that course was extremely eye-opening. So, introducing this learning opportunities and knowledge opportunities are very key tools to how you can mitigate resistance. Thank you.
Oh, Pamela, wow. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I have lots and lots that I want to kind of pick apart, but I'll just touch on a few points, and then I'm going to give over back to Betty and Malisa to just chime in and respond. But I love this idea of a pulse check, and I had never actually heard of that specific terminology before. But even before beginning something like a more formal gender audit, just getting a snapshot or checking in about where one is in an organizational context and where the organization is more sort of systematically or as a whole. I love the idea of doing that sort of snapshot exercise. And I really like the way that you speak about resistance, because your commentary around things like denial, your commentary around things like silence. When we think resistance, I suppose a reflex is to think about it as something quite overt and obvious. But as you so rightly point out, these things quite subtly play out in different dynamics and organizations. And this idea of not knowing, I was thinking about this in relation to privilege and in relation to what Betty and Malisa have said around working with men, and how perhaps privilege sometimes works in ways that mean certain people or certain groups of people don't have to know, because perhaps they haven't been inconvenienced by oppressive power systems, unequal gender dynamics. And so there is that process of bringing into consciousness, into immediate awareness, the different problems at play. So I love how you speak to knowledge, and you relate that so beautifully to Betty's point about resources as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And again, a very big congratulations on your recent award as well. So to Betty and Malisa, then I'm going to just open up the floor. I think the three of you have touched on these broad three ideas. Is there anything that you'd like to say in response to Pamela, or Betty in response to Malisa, vice versa? Any bits and pieces that you want to draw from and flesh out a little bit more? Betty, I'm afraid you are on mute there. Got to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No worries.
Good. Okay, so this was really a great session so far. I mean, all three of you are really thoughtful. You're thinking about how these things work, what goes on. One of the things that I do notice is that getting to the tipping point can sometimes be hard. You might have some support from certain players in the game. People will become more aware. You do an audit and people go, oh, I don't want to really do all this extra work. And they don't really want to be involved. And then you'll have one or two who tend to be leaders, especially with men. There will tend to be leaders on certain kinds of thinking, and they say, we don't need to do this. We're fine. And, I said, at one point I took one guy aside and I said, if I call your wife, will she tell me things are fine? And they do this, they do the downward look, right? And so what I think is very important is to figure out what do we need to do? What do we need to have in terms of understanding, in terms of willingness to make things start to move forward? Some of that's leadership. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have had boards that were at least half female, and they're often run by a woman who is the chair. So then they step down and say, they step on people. If stuff is coming out that's too sexist or too gender blind, they'll say, yeah, this isn't how we do business here. But we've jumped over the trigger point. Now, when I go into a room and I see, it's mostly men and they're all in suits, and I don't wear a suit to this event, and they're all looking at me, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a foreigner, and I'm also not dressed in my black suit and trousers like the rest of you. That doesn't mean that I don't have something to contribute. I may look different, but I have a brain. And I think the whole issue of the tipping point, at what point can you start to trigger that? And at what point can you actually step over the fence and start doing something?
Betty, I'm very interested to know how do the president, for example, how do men respond to this kind of this way of really pinpointing what the issues are and calling and actively calling the problems out? What are some of the different responses that you've got? I mean, I'm really interested in this.
Well, I just wrote a highly attended article on the question of gaps in the budget. And I said, look, the gender issue is not, where is the gender ministry, which is now one desk inside the president's office? Whereas, a 3-hour speech on the next year's budget that mentions women once and in the context of poverty. What happened to this picture? There was movement moving forward. And in 2020, the parliament sat down and said, gender responsive budgeting, this is how we have to look at a budget. And so then in 2021, new government, nothing happened. And now in this government, nothing yet has happened. So I actually published this and said, what happened? You dropped the ball here. What happened? And, there is a vice president who's female. His wife is very strong. But most of the people who are in government and most of the people who are ministers, it's about 15% of the total people who are women. Mm. And so that's not enough. The trigger point's 25%. And also, this is a conservative society. People hesitate to rock the boat, and it's understandable. And so they're saying, okay, but what about, if I do something, am I going to lose my job? Yeah. If I speak too loudly on the issue of women, will it be a problem for women? Mm. And the irony to me about all this is that the people who are starting to step up is traditional leaders. The chiefs and the Indunas and the village headmen and women are starting to step up and say, if we don't protect and serve women, then we have all sorts of other kinds of problems. Not enough money gets saved, not enough emergencies people are ready for. What about insurance? What about health circumstances? And what's happening is that at the local level, and certainly with traditional leaders, they're realizing how vital the role of women is in keeping the society moving. And so then they're stepping up as groups and saying, okay, we have to move this forward. We have to open the door to savings. We have to open the door to better services for women. I think for me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. It is exciting. Thank you so much, Betty. We are running out of time, believe it or not. I wish we could go on longer with this conversation. Malisa, 2 minutes allocated to you to just add on anything else that you want to share with us, your thoughts in relation to Betty and Pamela.
Thank you so much. I agree that more work needs to be done, and it's a lot of heavy lifting, and it needs to be done from a leadership position, the decision makers also, but also from the grassroots level, that sensitizing women of their power, their position, because many times you also have a situation where women don't value themselves. They don't see the work that they're doing as being productive, and that they are able to make a difference. And a lot of the work that we do is actually at local government level. It's in villages, and empowering those women or just showing them, or together actually identifying what their levers are, and they are able to put pressure on their governments in elections, for example. But then at the same time, when we come up to decision makers, something that Pamela said was, for some things, you're going to need policies and laws. Yeah. So that they are regulations, and there are also repercussions for not changing, because some people will not change any other way. And then to consider, what is the cost of gender transformative approaches? I think we don't talk about the price enough, and to say that it's something that requires sacrifice, determination, but also working together. It can be done, but we have a long way.
Yeah. Well, working together, certainly a very exciting and dynamic space to end the conversation, I think, because it, opens up a lot of possibility to take this conversation forward, but also to continue the work more broadly. And I know the three of you are masterful in your different areas, and it's really, really inspiring to see such important and meaningful work going on in Zambia and Uganda. So I commend all three of you, and thank you so much again for your time. It's truly a privilege to listen to you share your expertise, your experiences, And hopefully people in the audience have taken something away from the conversation. Betty, keep writing, keep speaking to the president. And Pamela and Malisa, please continue on with all of this important work. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Pathway as well, and all of the organizers for, hosting and pulling off this wonderful event. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Privilege.
Bye.
Thank you.